1969, a 6-year-old boy was playing hide-and-seek 5 yards from his father in the Great Smoky Mountains. His father never took his eyes off him. The boy hid behind a bush and never came out. Over 1,400 people searched for him. The FBI was called in. Bloodhounds were brought from across the state. No trace of Dennis Martin was ever found. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, nothing. He was simply gone.
Father's Day weekend, 1969. The Martin family drove to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for a camping trip. Clyde Martin, his father, his brother Douglas, his grandfather, and Dennis, 6 years old, recently turned, full of energy the way 6-year-olds are. They were an experienced camping family. They knew the park. They knew the trails. This was not their first time. On June 14th, the afternoon of the second day, the children were playing near Spence Field, an open meadow surrounded by dense Appalachian forest. The adults were close by, watching. A group of children, Dennis included, decided to play a prank on the adults. They would split up, hide in the tree line, and jump out together to scare their parents. It was a game. A silly, normal, childhood game. The other children jumped out as planned. Dennis didn't. Clyde Martin ran to the last place he'd seen his son within 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The boy had been visible to his father moments before. He was gone. No sound, no cry, no sign of a struggle. Just gone. What followed was one of the largest search operations in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over 1,400 people searched. The FBI was called in. Military personnel were deployed. Bloodhounds were brought from multiple states. The search lasted weeks. The search dogs, experienced, trained animals, found no scent. Not at the meadow, not in the tree line. Not on any of the trails leading away from Spence Field. Search dogs don't lose a scent trail this quickly. Not under normal circumstances. The family reported something else that has never been explained. The moment Dennis disappeared, the forest went silent. No birds, no insects, no wildlife sounds of any kind. An unnatural silence that lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. Witnesses reported it independently. They hadn't spoken to each other about it. The silence was real. There was one potential witness. A family hiking on a nearby trail reported seeing a large, rough-looking man in a ragged shirt moving quickly through the forest, away from Spence Field. He was moving fast, too fast for the terrain. He was carrying something large against his chest. Something covered that they initially thought was an animal. When they heard about the missing boy, they reported what they had seen. The man was never identified. The description was never matched to anyone. That evening, a violent storm moved through the Smoky Mountains, erasing any remaining physical evidence. Paulides notes this in his research. Unexpected severe weather arriving directly after a disappearance is a recurring pattern in missing 411 cases. It has happened too many times to be coincidental, he argues. Dennis Martin was never found. No remains, no clothing, no personal belongings. In 2019, 50 years after his disappearance, a Freedom of Information Act request was filed to access the official case file. The request was denied, citing privacy concerns. For a missing child's case from 1969, Dennis Martin would be 61 years old today. His family never stopped looking.
Keith Parkins was 2 years old. In the winter of 1952,
His family was visiting his grandfather's ranch in Ritter, Oregon, a remote rural property surrounded by dense forest. The nearest town was miles away. Keith was playing outside in the yard. His grandfather was watching him through the window, checking on him regularly the way you watch a 2-year-old in an unfamiliar place. One check, the boy was there. The next check, he wasn't. Minutes had passed. Maybe 5, maybe less. A 2-year-old cannot move far in 5 minutes, not on uneven ground, not in winter weather, wearing light clothing. The grandfather went outside immediately, called for Keith, searched the yard, the outbuildings, the perimeter of the property. Nothing. The forest began at the edge of the property. The grandfather looked into it. The trees were dense, the undergrowth was thick, and the temperature was dropping fast. A winter storm was moving in that evening. A 2-year-old alone in those woods at night would not survive. Search parties were organized immediately. Local men, experienced in the terrain, fanned out through the forest. They searched through the night. They found nothing. Morning came. The storm had passed, and still no sign of Keith. Search dogs were brought in. They found no scent trail, not from the yard, not at the forest edge. Nothing. 19 hours after Keith Parkins disappeared, he was found, alive, face down in the snow 12 miles from his grandfather's ranch. 12 miles, over rough forested terrain, through a winter storm. 19 hours, for a 2-year-old boy. Experienced adult hikers have walked that route. They estimate it takes 6 to 8 hours under good conditions for a fit adult. Keith Parkins was 2 years old. In winter clothing, in a storm, he had no injuries consistent with 12 miles of travel through that terrain. No cuts from brush, no swelling in his feet. His clothing, while wet from the snow, showed no signs of the kind of wear you'd expect. Keith recovered physically, but he had no memory of what happened to him. None. Not the walk, not the night, not the storm. Not how he got 12 miles from a ranch he'd never been to before. Doctors at the time attributed his memory loss to trauma and exposure, but they couldn't explain the distance. They couldn't explain the condition of his clothing, and they couldn't explain something the grandfather noticed when Keith was found and brought home. The boy's shoes had almost no wear on the soles for 12 miles of travel through forest and snow. Almost nowhere. Keith Parkins grew up. He lived a full life, but he never remembered that night, and he reportedly never liked being near forests. He never explained why.
On October 2nd, 1999, a 3-year-old boy named Jaryd Atadero went on a group hike near Big South Trail in Colorado. His father, Jaryd Atadero, had arranged for Jaryd to go with a group of adults from a Christian singles group while Alan stayed at the retreat center. He trusted the group. He knew the trail. The group was large. There were adults all around. Jaryd was at the back of the group, chatting with some of the adults, when he saw something ahead on the trail. He ran forward to look. The group assumed he had run ahead to the adults at the front. The adults at the front assumed he was still with the people at the back. By the time anyone realized Jaryd wasn't with either group, he was gone. The search began immediately. Search and rescue teams arrived within hours. Helicopters flew the area, experienced trackers combed the trail and surrounding forest. They found nothing, no scent trail for the dogs, no footprints off the trail, no sign that a 3-year-old boy had passed through that area at all. The search lasted weeks, then months. Nothing. Jaryd Atadero spent years searching for his son. He wrote a book about it. He spoke publicly about the case. He never stopped. 4 years after Jaryd disappeared, in 2003, a hiker found partial remains in the area of the original search. A tooth, part of a skull, A shoe. The remains were identified as Jaryd's through DNA testing. The location where the remains were found had been searched, not once, not twice, dozens of times. Experienced search teams with dogs had covered that exact area repeatedly during the original search. The remains weren't hidden, they weren't buried, they were in plain sight. How does a search team with dogs miss human remains in an area they've searched dozens of times? There is no satisfactory answer to that question. But that's not the detail that stays with people who study this case. The shoe found with Jaryd's remains was on the wrong foot. A 3-year-old boy's shoe, found 4 years after his disappearance. On the wrong foot. As if someone had placed it there. As if someone had dressed him. Jaryd Atadero has spoken about this publicly. He doesn't have an explanation. The investigators don't have an explanation. David Paulides includes this case in his research as one of the most disturbing examples of the patterns he's documented. Jaryd Atadero would be 28 years old today. His father still speaks about him. His father still doesn't have answers. None of these families do.